I have a very brief presentation to make as well. You know, no one here has mentioned the R word, which in fact I think none of us expect to occur with you. You will be indeed, I hope everyone knows what the R word is here.
Reincarnation?
That's right. Remembrance. Henry, we expect and hope and will benefit greatly from your continued involvement in the division as long as both of us are able to do this.
And it's voluntary?
And it's voluntary, except when you're expected to do things. That's right, as long as you know it still works. We also, the faculty and friends and colleagues, felt we wanted to, though, do something in honor of this occasion and recognition of your many contributions. And we tried to decide what to do, and we thought that probably the best thing would be to create a long-term recognition of your contributions, both to the field and to us and to the division, by establishing a scholarship in your name. And we have already done that to the point of being able to present a plaque where the students who will be awarded this by criteria yet to be developed will have an opportunity to both be associated with you and everyone to see how important you have been to us as well as to them. So.
Thank you. I thought it was going to have the criteria. It simply has all these nice words, and I'm not going to read them. Thank you, Russell.
And Henry asked to say a few words, so please.
But I left my notes down there. Russell, you know, you did this 5 years ago, and it's so beautiful. I heard things 5 years ago that I never thought I would hear, and that I shouldn't have heard, but I loved. And that was enough. And this is Lagniappe. A few of you have been to New Orleans and know what the word Lagniappe means. It's more than is needed. Thank you, Russ, and the organizing committee, and Marcia and Kathy and Nola and Janelle and Sam and her staff that put this together. And to the speakers, I would really like to hear a hand for the speakers that did such a wonderful job today. You know, Stacy said that the only thing people would really be interested in this time of night is your stories, but it's too late. I'm axing out all the anecdotes. I'd like to just comment on a couple of things I heard today. I'll miss a few. But I was very pleased when Jack said that I was basically trying to urge people to see things more clearly. And then Jack said something also about blackburnizing the audience. I think that would be a mistake. And Milt said, led us to consider the root causes of risk and disease, and got us there. Dave Jacobs brought up the credo that we all live by, and that is the motto of the Tahoe Seminar: if it's not fun, it's not epidemiology. I would appreciate George considering our hunter-gatherer legacy. I think we should all consider that, particularly after the meal we just had, and that health and politics are inseparable. And I liked Gary. What do you expect from a wonderful person and Seventh-day Adventist who thinks there are still mystical qualities in vegetables, fruits, olive oil, and nuts? Al, better than anyone I've ever heard, showed us the intimacy of the relationship between gender and color. and cardiovascular disease risk and socioeconomic status, and pointed out the potential for primordial prevention. And speaking of primordial prevention, Dar thrust us into the arms of primordial prevention as a choice, as an alternate to his proposal, protoprophylaxis. Thank you, Dar, for getting us back on track. Dr. Burwinkle gave us a statistical definition for when more research is needed to be done. And Roger said something very nice that I tried to teach what can't be found in books, and that we're all much closer to rabbits than we are to rooks. John Finnegan put order in what I still regard as a media jungle out there. Bob DeBusk bridged medical care and prevention and showed us how heart attacks can really focus the mind. Sid Smith, I'm very sorry, Sid, that my wife missed your presentation, to know that I was a solid rock and also created a zone of comfort for physicians practicing prevention. You know that. Good. Sid prepared a wonderful handy prevention cookbook for us and broadened our vision of delivering preventive care. Anybody that can get the support of the North Carolina State Legislature and anti-tobacco efforts judges deserves all our acclaim. He also amazed me with the idea that the market share in medicine might not be all bad. A system driven by market share. Dar, we'll have time for Dar. He helped us, you're spared for tonight, to define primordial prevention as preserving the root social conditions in which risk factors do not arise, and he used the term I like so much, that this is really a part of prevention in the first place. Cheryl reassured us that boys and girls were different, and as we suspected that our adolescent health, the rebellious behavior of our adolescents co-varies. That's funny. The risk behavior of our rebellious adolescents co-varies. All right. I thought it was very amusing. I have had a lot of wonderful adventures. I might touch on a couple. Some words were said about the Minnesota Code. Some of you know the little story of how it came to be that Ron Prinius and Richard Crow and Pentti Rautaharju and Gunnar Blomqvist and Sven Punzar and myself no longer have to read paper electrocardiograms. I was commissioned one summer to read 6,000 electrocardiograms for the National Health Surveys as a representative sample of the whole country. And I agreed to do this at 25 cents a copy. I thought it'd be a nice summer job. Until they arrived, and they were all in tightly rolled, in tightly wound rolls in little cubicles. And I found that I had to take those out and unroll them and put weights on them, read them, code them, write it down, roll them back up, put them back in. The 25% began to look rather paltry until I recruited a couple of helpers that were near and somewhat dear to me, ages 7 and 8.5, I think. And for a penny apiece, one of them unrolled the records and put the weights on it. I read and coded very quickly, and the other one rolled it up and put them back in. And they made a magnificent profit of 6,000 cents apiece for the summer, and I got the 23 cents. And I haven't read a paper cardiogram since that I wasn't paid better for. Tess has mentioned our dear friend and colleague, Al. Al and I were Tulane mates together. And I really went to Paris because Al went there. And it was the thing to do for Tulane graduates to man the American Hospital of Paris. And Al met me at the boat train and took me down in the subway, and in this dark Paris subway. I'd never been to Paris, and all of a sudden he would say, "We get off here," and we'd come up, and there would be Trocadero and the Eiffel Tower. We'd go down again, we'd come up, and there would be Sacré-Cœur and Notre Dame, the most beautiful artistic introduction to Paris culture you could imagine. A lot of things happened besides the rather kooky fact that I went on their honeymoon with them. This was in 1950, before we did kooky things like that. You and I had a little falling out on the Sunday of following your honeymoon because I wanted to see the Chateau Chenonceau and you wanted to go to Mass. But we made up. I learned tolerance. And if the truth be known, Nellie and my little family had won at that time, and I came to Minnesota because of Al and Tess. I finally got tired of climbing mountains and having a good time taking care of displaced persons in Bavaria and Salzburg, and decided to come back and get an education. I applied to places with mountains, Denver, Portland, Salt Lake City, and Minnesota because Al and Tess were here, and I got accepted in Minnesota and was very pleased to come here. A few of you might know that I came very close to being a medical missionary. My father and grandfather were missionaries, and I'd been very impressed with missionaries who came to our home. Homer Rodeheaver, the great evangelist, came to our home once, and I was most impressed with him. He drafted me at age 10. Actually, these traveling revivalists during the 30s would come to my father during the depths of the Depression. I'm sure they were starving, and asked my father if they could use the very staid Methodist church in our little community in Bradenton, Florida. And he would size them up and talk to them a while, and if he decided that they were true men of the faith and were not too far out, he would give them the use of his church from Wednesday to Saturday for their revival, and said, "I want nothing to do with this. You're free. Bring the people in. Bring my congregation in, and do your witnessing." And as the deal was sealed with Homer Rodeheaver, perhaps the greatest evangelist, well-known evangelist other than Billy Sunday of those days, he spied me, a 10-year-old freckle-faced boy, and he said, "Now, Pastor and Ms. Blackburn, I have need for a laboratory assistant." A couple of you have heard this story. And it'll be on the last day of the meeting. And so he recruited me, and my parents agreed, and I blushed and very happy to help the great evangelist. And he instructed me very carefully what should I do. And the week had been marvelous, and a lot of people had come down and accepted the faith, and he felt very good about it, and I'm sure his coffers were ringing. The last day, I was dressed up in a laboratory coat, and my job was to sit a rack of test tubes up on the railing of my father's church. And the first one was distilled water, and the second one was Coca-Cola, and the third was grain alcohol. And I was to break and separate an egg and pour the white into each of these receptacles in front of the audience, and he would introduce pure water as God gave it from the springs of our wonderful earth, and I would put in egg white and make a very nice opalescent semi-solution. And Coca-Cola, that addiction of Southerners in this country, and indeed it was an addiction. I have seen women at country revivals with babes in their arms with nipples on Coke bottles, feeding their hyperactive children. This is what happens when you drink that vile fluid Coca-Cola, and of course, in the mild acid of carbonic acid, the egg white would solidify. I'd pour the Coke out, and there was the egg white. And then the alcohol and the instant coagulation. We ended up our little demonstration by inviting a very attractive 17-year-old girl up. She had been carefully recruited by him during the week, coaxed. And we lay her out on the altar and draped her in surgical gowns, and we both put on masks and gowns, and he became Homer Rodeheaver, the great surgeon. And I was a surgeon's assistant, happily. And with the help of his drama and a lot of mercurochromed gauze, we proceeded to open up the chest of this young lady, and I took out her heart, a Valentine box, and I opened the Valentine box and exposed it to the audience to see the emptiness of a heart without the presence of the Lord, and pray for this young girl's soul. And they did, and we sang hymns together, and we all gathered around the altar, and we filled that empty heart with the love of God, and it was a very tender meeting. I had promised my father when I went to medical school that I would give it a fling, and the day I graduated from my internship, I went to the Oriente province of Cuba. A few of you know this story, not many. And worked with a Methodist missionary there during the height of the Batista period, the depths of the Batista period. And we organized 5 Methodist clinics on the eastern end of the island, right under the Sierra Maestra, where Castro was beginning to foment. No, he wasn't. This was 49. It was a little before Castro. And it was an overwhelming experience for me. And I found out that I didn't have Dennis Burkett's zeal, and I didn't have Schweitzer's devotion for life. I was horrified. And I was horrified by many experiences. I'll recount only one. I'm going to go on. I'm going to close with just a couple of anecdotes. This wonderful man, we'll call him Dr. B, who had been trained at the Sorbonne and in Philadelphia and had come back to his own community of Bayamo, near Santiago de Cuba, and given his life to his community instead of setting up a fancy practice in Havana. And this wonderful man, I went out with him. We went on a 4-day trip on horseback back through the woods, making his itinerant calls. And I remember one of my functions was to take care of his sterilizing kit in his saddlebag, which was a lead brick, which would open up and had the tools in it, and you could simply close it up and bury it in coals, or put it in any fire, and sterilize the instruments. And we went about doing minor surgery. And at the end of a very long day in a patio of a house that we had commandeered, we had a desperate call from a young man on a motorcycle who'd come over the mountain and said, "Please come see my sister. She's very ill." And so we started out at the end of a long day. And late at night, we got to this kerosene lamp lit little hovel, and there was this beautiful young woman with classical rose spots and a palpable spleen and hemorrhagic Peyer's patches, all the classical triad of typhoid as you don't see anymore. And I had brought chloromycetin, the first chloromycetin that had ever been seen in Cuba, and I had a whole bunch of pharmaceutical extra supplies that I'd taken from my internship at Chicago Wesley Hospital. And so we instructed her family very carefully on how to administer the chloromycetin and maintain her fluid intake, and that we would see her again in 24 hours after we'd finished our circle of the mountains. We came back 24 hours later, and the girl was dead. We hadn't left a half an hour for that family, this wonderful doctor, and the young intern with the miracle drug, because of superstition and the strength of hoodoo, which you may know of as voodoo. they'd called in a second opinion, and he had advised castor oil by mouth and mineral oil on their abdomen, massaging the abdomen. She died of an exsanguinating hemorrhage after a few hours. Experience after experience of that, and I decided that I was no Albert Schweitzer. The good thing it did, though I ran away from missions in a hurry, the good thing it did is it showed me the social origins of mass diseases, common diseases that were born in oppression and poverty and ignorance and superstition, and not medical phenomena. I really have had the best of all worlds, professionally and personally. And I was warned by Jerry, since I will certainly forget people, I shouldn't single them out, and so I won't. But I will say a few things about the people that have given me this best of all worlds. It's the best of all worlds, I think, to grow up in a small town. Those of you who've done that know that that's true. To be a part of a small community, part of a family, to be the PK, the preacher's kid who simply couldn't be bad, of whom much was expected. To have good small town schooling. I had two sisters as English teachers, and they would not only read and recite, but speak in Middle English. Beowulf. I had a speech teacher that was so wonderful that took dry, shy Henry Blackburn, I assure you, at age 16, and gave me the lead in the junior play, and then wrote a little note, "My, how you grew." And I had a Rhodes Scholar as a professor of Latin. The principal of our school was a Rhodes Scholar. Town of 15,000 in Florida. I feel that I had the best of worlds growing up. I had the good fortune to be in the U.S. Navy during a time when everybody should have been in the Navy. And we all had a mission. It was a wonderful mission. Nobody I knew that wasn't involved with that mission. And yet, I was able to get my education, just as Jerry was. The Army program, I was in the Navy program. And I was able to pay back that service in the relative safety of displaced person camps in Austria after the war, where again I saw that the common diseases were caused by mass phenomena of oppression and poverty, ignorance and superstition. I feel very fortunate that I was able to bridge this period between medicine as mainly an art and mainly a science, and to have the marvelous mentors, the grand clinicians on their rounds, the artists, and the modern clinical investigators, and then the superb, broad public health investigators, Ansel and Henry Taylor. I guess we all have had the best of the worlds to live in this world, the Western world, the freest of any world. The French affinity I've mentioned. The German affinity led to my being here tonight, the German experience. I came back to Minnesota at the same time of Jack Farquhar, and I was still tuned into the German language and liked it. And there was a lovely, prototypical, bald, pudgy German professor who was consulting in electrocardiography at the Veterans Hospital here in Minneapolis, Ernst Simonson, who had gotten out of Europe just in time. And I was so tuned into that language that I glommed onto him, and he taught me reading electrocardiograms, and no other resident would get near him because he couldn't understand him. He refused to speak German to me, but, he taught the equivalent of franglais in German. And I learned electrocardiography with him, and it was he that brought me to Stadium Gate 27. And resulted in my meeting Ansel and Henry Taylor and getting involved in physiology, physiological hygiene, trials, and then epidemiology. Not many of you know that we almost lost the Laboratory of Physiological Hygiene when the founder retired. there was a very strong movement in the community and in the medical school that this had been Ansel's lab. It was a one-person undertaking, and it should close when he closed, and that sounded reasonable to everybody, and they were sitting around very satisfied with this decision. And I was not quite as bad as my father, who would never politic to become bishop. He said, if the good Lord's willing, sort of thing. I saw that the lab was going to go down the drain. I was in Europe on a sabbatical, but I called two people. I called Al Sullivan, Tessa's wonderful husband, and I called Richard Ebert, professor of medicine. I said, I don't think I have any currency with you, but I don't think the lab should die, and put in a word for me for the new dean, Lee Stauffer, who didn't know me, I didn't know him. They're about to close the lab, and both of them did. And Lee Stauffer had such a high regard for their opinion that they kept the lab. Then he came and met me when I came back and said, going to give you the lab, Henry. Going to take away $40,000 of your state funds, take Ansel's salary, and you'll have to teach occupational health, and we'll control your... I said, okay, Lee. And then Ted Cooper and then Bob Levy came along. And a good idea, well presented, and the Makarska program, the Joint Commission report, the atherosclerosis Volume 1, all happened at the same time, and we took off for the major preventive trials, and we haven't had to look backwards since. And we were very fortunate to get our wonderful staff and our faculty on in the first major recruitment. We took a picture in the back of the first recruitment, which was Ron Prenius, then Richard Crow, then Art Leon, then Dave Jacobs. And then it goes up from there, or down, as the case may be. We were fortunate to get that kind of strength in place before all the depressions hit us. And we're fortunate to have that strength in place now, and the new leadership that's so strong. And we're having a test of our strength that we've never had before, that no academic institution has ever had before. And I won't politicize about that tonight, but you will see about it in your papers, and I hope in the New England Journal of Medicine elsewhere, how a remarkable business consulting firm has been invited at a remarkable fee to come and reorganize our academic health center, almost in secrecy, with first trying to destroy tenure. We're really under a remarkable siege with the very original idea that we'll have vertical organization, eliminate schools, the departments, divisions, deans, division heads. We'll have vertical reporting to a lay research administrator for the research component, vertical reporting to the teaching administrator and to the service, as if these things were totally separate. This is the greatest trial that our institution has faced, and I didn't mean to bring up an unpleasant subject for us, but I'm glad that you're, and our present strong faculty, there's not a person afraid in our faculty, and we'll face this and we'll make it work the Minnesota way. I'm very fortunate to have some health and a few powers left to chase some other muses and writing, in which I hope to do honor and no harm to my family and my colleagues. Some of you have already felt that. And to pursue the muse of music. And Jack and Ron and others have mentioned the music. You've really missed the real idea. Appreciated the comment about the spark between Stacy and myself in your household. That was quite true. But the real idea is for a person who is dry and not entirely humorless, but dry and shy, who doesn't and who didn't and who doesn't make people smile every day at work, to be able to make people smile, and not only smile, but sway, and not only sway, but swing, that's an unspeakable delight. So I'm fortunate to be able to smell the roses and back to nature and to my roots and be with my family and the wonderful children and grandchildren you've seen. I'm grateful for all of you coming. It's been a beautiful experience, and I hope you will all come to my house tomorrow night, and I won't ask you to raise your hand to see who's coming. We welcome you, one and all, and there'll be a little music, and we'll have a little wine. I'm grateful also for a career far beyond my talents, for adventures far beyond my dreams, for the time to acknowledge those of you who've made my way smoother and those of you who've made my way richer. Thank you all.
That is the program for tonight. Thank you, everyone. There is a hospitality suite in 1736. There may be some folks there. The meeting begins at 8:30 tomorrow. Thank you. That's 2:30 London time.